Thank you very much for joining me at this session, really, I suppose. And when I was asked to talk about compassion, I was sort of thinking, you know, how I approach this subject and what is important for me as compassion. I suppose I come up with this title of Humanising Our Care, and I'll discuss a wee bit later, and you'll see where the title come from in a bit. But I suppose in our system at the moment, there's a lot of talk about compassion and about developing compassionate cultures. And for me, it's all about just humanising our care, humanising what we do. And I suppose it's about keeping a relentless focus on compassion and being human, really. And again, I suppose you'll hear a little bit later about my challenge to us, especially in our HR world and our people world, about compassionate cultures and humanising our care. Because sometimes I think we go into process mode, and I think we do a lot of work with people and to people, and sometimes I would just query, is that about how we humanise our care? But I'll talk about that in a second, really. I suppose the next bit really is about, this is really what I want to cover. I'm just going to talk about compassionate leadership and how does that sit with collective leadership, and I'll maybe share with you a bit around our journey in Northern Ireland. What does compassionate leadership mean in terms of humanising our care, and what could possibly go wrong? And then how do we create a culture of compassionate leadership? I suppose here in Northern Ireland, we have much discussions around collective leadership, compassionate leadership. And again, I know in our system, there are discussions around compassion sit within collective leadership, or does collective leadership sit as part of compassionate leadership? And for me, it really doesn't matter as long as we're aware of both things. The model you're currently seeing is our model in Northern Ireland for collective leadership. We have a national model within health and social care for collective leadership. And you'll see right at the very centre of that, we talk about collective leadership being made up of 4 different components. The first one is compassionate leadership, which I'm going to talk about today. We also talk about shared leadership in and across teams, and that is about making sure that we have good team-based working within our system. We also talk about leadership as the responsibility of all, and recognising that everyone has a leadership role really to play within collective and compassionate leadership, but also that we're not an island and we need to work interdependently as part of a greater system, really. So again, it's just to say that it's an element. Collective and compassionate leadership, I think, are 2 words that are talked about within our system interchangeably, really. I suppose one of the first things is really about looking at what do we mean actually by compassion. And I suppose compassion is just, for me, just a human behaviour and a human need, really. I suppose we've heard this morning already that this has been a challenging period for us all, both personally and professionally, in terms of health and healthcare delivery, and no more so than in the HR profession. But I think during that period, we've learned that in all of that, the importance, the centrality of compassion, really, and compassion is something we need to really, really work about. Again, I think Tom Simons described earlier about the fantastic and incredible commitment that we've had to innovation, leadership during the pandemic. But I think one of the key things that certainly I've noticed and observed through our system really has been the importance of compassion, and how that, amongst all things, will get us through all of this. I suppose this is just one definition of compassion, and it's from a book that I'll refer to in a second as well, about compassionomics. It talks about compassion being the emotional response to another's pain or suffering, involving an authentic desire to help. And I suppose that's where really, in terms of compassionate leadership, it is about wanting to help others. It's not about having to. And I suppose that's a bit, again, the linkage to my humanising care. I think, and again, this may be where there's a sharp intake of breath of my HR colleagues. I think when we've done things and when we potentially do things within HR, so we've had different initiatives, Joy at Work, Great Places to Work, engagement initiatives, etc. And I suppose my question would be, are we going into a mode of process, of doing things to people? Or are we really being human with people? Are we humanizing our care? And are we actually having an authentic desire to help them? And again, I'll talk about that in a second, really in a bit more detail. But I suppose, again, it's just recognizing that compassion is the foundation of human behavior and humanity. We know that compassion is statistically proven the impact on patients, staff, and organizations. And again, I've got this book up here by two American medics, really, who talk about the need to be compassionate and really the outcomes, really. So I suppose the economics of compassion, really. There's lots of data in there. I mean, there's a number of studies that we know that there is an impact on patients, staff, and organizations. And I suppose I would want us as HR professionals always to do what we know is underpinned by the research. We do it in every other part of our work in health and social care. We underpin everything with knowledge, with the rigor of research, etc. But sometimes in our HR practices and sometimes in our leadership world, we tend to forget some of that. And I suppose it's really just to remember that there's lots of evidence and lots of data out there about the importance of compassion. Importance of compassion in terms of ourselves, but also to our patients, really. And ultimately to our organisations. And again, I've put in there about experience of satisfaction and burnout. No more so now, and we've heard a lot this morning about the whole impact of the pandemic on our staff, on their personal lives, on their professional lives, and on our work, really. I suppose, again, how do we define it in Northern Ireland? And this is, again, not the panacea for everything, but how we've looked at compassion and how we've tried to develop a culture of compassionate leadership is by looking at 4 core elements, really. We've said we want a culture where everyone looks after their own physical, psychological, and social well-being. And again, I think we've heard a lot of that this morning, really. Where we show kindness and listens to the other and understanding their needs and to help them improve their well-being. So again, there's something about self-care, and that's probably the number one thing we need to look after in all of this. But the care of others really is really important. But that also requires us to be emotionally intelligent, know how to use that, know how to understand our own attitudes, feelings, and behaviours, and how that impacts on other people. But I suppose the bottom line underpinning all of this is about how do we be authentic? How do we be real, genuine, open, and honest? And again, I suppose that's what I meant earlier about some of our initiatives that we create within HR. Are we definitely sure, and are we challenging ourselves to their authenticity, really? Many of you will have seen this by our good friend and colleague, Professor Michael West, who talks about compassionate leadership for compassionate health services. And he talks about the 4 elements of compassion: attending to our staff, so listening really with deep fascination, not just having words, not just having conversations with them, but are we actually listening with intent, really? Listening with intent to understand people. So again, I know in the busyness of our day-to-day lives, we can rush around, we can have a corridor conversation and ask people, are they okay? But I suppose my challenge to all of us would be, are we really asking, are they okay to listen and to listen with fascination? Or are we just paying the tokenistic, are you okay? And waiting for the response of, yes, I'm fine, really? And again, I suppose my presentation today is full of challenge to us all, and I don't mean to put us down, but I'm just wanting us to sort of think for ourselves and think about really intentionally about what we're doing in terms of compassion, especially in our HR field, really. So when we understand, the second part of that is about empathizing, really to understand where people are coming from and to empathise with that. But I suppose the key difference in compassion and being human is the part of taking action. And that really is the 4th element of compassionate leadership. Is really about how we use empathy and compassion, but it really is the action that we take that actually makes the difference, really, that actually creates the human behaviour, really. I suppose I'm going to share with you just, and again, in true L&D style, an exercise that I do, and I'm going to just ask you in a second, really, just to look at this. So this is just a key question, a check-in that I would do with people, and I've been doing quite quite regularly with staff and with other people that I'm working with, asking them, who they are, what has this experience felt like for them really? And really, again, not just to hear back, but actually to intently listen to how they're feeling, how their emotions have been. Are they frustrated? Are they angry? Are they angry? Have they been excited? Have they been challenged by it? But asking that really deep question, really, why do they do the type of work and how do they feel right now? All quite authentic questions to ask, but can also become quite a process. I've shared this with people, and I've then been asked the question about, well, what questions do you ask? And my thing is, it has to be a normal human interaction. You have to ask the question, do you feel in your gut? You have to ask, because if you start to just go through a process of questions, it just feels like a process. It doesn't feel very human if I feel that you're just asking me that question because you think you have to. I think you want to ask it to me if you actually feel it from the heart and feel it from the gut. So I suppose one of my questions I'm going to ask you now is, how are you feeling right now? I'm putting up on the slides here, and I share again this with colleagues quite a lot and do it in the centre quite a lot. And my colleagues from Northern Ireland will have seen this before if they've been on anything with me about where do you sit right now. So right on this Tuesday, the 1st of December at 1:10 in the afternoon, I want you to have a look around that wheel and say, where are you sitting right now, right this moment? And what I'd ask you to do is, there is hopefully a poll in the section really. And if you go into the poll, I'd like you to register and just click on, where do you see yourself sitting right this moment, really? Do you feel in that top right hand quadrant of energized, playful, enthusiastic, confident, proud? Do you feel in that renewed bucket of green, where you feel appreciated, trusted, thoughtful, peaceful, calm? Or where I'm hearing a lot of people sitting at the moment on our staff and our people we serve, they feel burnout, really, helpless, lethargic, guilty. I mean, again, I've heard guilt being used quite a bit in our system at the minute, or negative, that stress, furious, irritated, apprehensive, insecure, worried, etc. And I suppose even at the start of this, it also shows you that emotions can move quite quickly. So at the start of this session, when the tech wasn't working, I was probably sitting very close in that red, worried, anxious, apprehensive, etc. And as the session is now going on, I'm now moving around into that energized space. So what I want you to do is, if you can, pop over into the poll and click on, where do you see yourself right now, really? See some doing it. I see the results coming up, which is great. So again, it's interesting here that we're seeing quite a lot, and the key thing of this is to get a sense check really of where people are. And I'm seeing quite a lot of energize and renew, which is great. But I'm also seeing around about a third of us sitting saying and feeling that we're stressed. 17% saying we're burnt out. That's quite a lot of people out of 35 saying that they're sitting in that sort of red and blue areas. And I suppose for me, that's really important to know for how I conduct my work and how I'm even delivering this session, really. Because that might help me understand where some of the comments may come from, where some of the questions may come from, where some of the challenges in this session might come from, where might the interest lie in a session like this from something like that. So I think it's just really important to ask people where they're currently feeling. And it's not with me just to say, oh yeah, that's lovely. I see that, over 50% of us are sitting in energize and renew. But I also need to be curious about why and what's happening to those people who are burnt out and stressed. Just as much as I'm interested in the energize renew, I must also be curious about the burnout and stress. It needs to be authentic, really. And I suppose why did I share that with you? I suppose in my world, I use a lot of check-in and check-out. And I suppose as HR professionals, what I want us to think about, and I want us to be honest with ourselves. When we do ask questions around how people are feeling, are we asking it to genuinely be interested be concerned, be thoughtful, be deliberate in how we're going to receive that, and are we using that to be compassionate, to take actions if we don't hear things. But likewise, when we're asked the question, I suppose I would also ask us, how often are we honest with people when we do give the answer back? So I know even over this last 6 months, people have asked me continually, how are you feeling, how are you, etc. And again, the standard response is, okay, I'm fine, I'm okay, I'm dealing with it, etc., etc. So I suppose it's from both ends, really. It's about how do you respond to a question like that, but also how do you receive a question like that? I'm leaving these slides on, folks, because I think this is a really good exercise just to get into and to demonstrate some level of authenticity or compassion in our day-to-day work as HR practitioners. And whilst they've done it out as a slide, I don't want people taking this as a process, whilst it might seem to be a process. But it really is just telling you the importance of checking in and out. And again, it's a way to build relationships, share information. As I say, it's also really important for me to understand what's my own emotional state when I'm getting into this meeting, this environment, this situation, this discussion with staff. I suppose I need to recognize my own emotional state, because that will impact on other people. That's where the emotional intelligence will come in. But it's also to recognize, for me, just even looking down the voting and the polling there, to recognize that only 50% or just over 50% in the room, nearly 60% are in that green-blue area. But there's quite a significant amount of people in the room who are sitting in that red and amber place. And also to be mindful of that, because mindful of that is around also understanding the words that I use, the behaviours maybe that I exert during a meeting or during an interaction. So it actually can alter how I interact with people in the room, really. But it also allows us to be human with each other and understand where people are coming from. Again, I'm just leaving this on, and I'm happy to share the slides after this, folks. I'm not going to go through this, but this is just letting you know that there is a process for it and there's a rationale behind checking in and out. And as I said, when I've shared this before, people have wanted to talk about, well, what questions would you ask and how long should you give people? And when you start to ask how many questions, how long, it then becomes a process, really. It doesn't just become then a normal human interaction. And I suppose, again, that's what I want us to check and challenge ourselves. When we think we're doing things quite compassionately, are we going into process mode, or are we actually going into humanistic behaviour mode, really? And again, I can't answer that. I just want everyone to sort of think about it a bit. It's a bit that I'm a bit curious about myself and our system, and I'll talk about it in a second. I suppose one of the first steps in compassionate leadership and creating a culture of compassion is the courage to be self-compassionate. And again, I know as HR professionals that we know that this is really important. But I suppose I just want to put this in here because I think whilst we all know it's really important, I would sometimes challenge us as HR professionals about how often do we do this for ourselves. We're quite often looking after our workforce, looking after other people within our system. And I suppose, again, we know the first step in a compassionate leadership culture is to have the courage of self-compassion. Be mindful, be gentle, and be honest with yourself. So be kind. Again, be mindful, because being mindful is about being understanding about how you are in this actual moment. So how am I, again, back to that question earlier, how are you actually sitting at 1:15, maybe very different than how you're sitting at 1:20 or 1:30 in the afternoon. And it's just about recognizing that in yourself, being kind with yourself and just accepting that that's how you're feeling at this point in time. But then also, how do you do something about that? I suppose, again, I heard a really interesting quote, and it was literally just yesterday from the Dalai Lama, who said, "We are as worthy of care and compassion and love as any other human being on this planet." And I think just to put the challenge out to us as HR professionals, when we are so engaged in looking after our workforce and the people around us, that sometimes self-compassion is something that we also need to think of as a profession. So who are looking after the people? Who are looking after the people? And I suppose that's a key question for me. So who are looking after us? And I suppose that needs to start with each and every one of us. I'm putting this in because this, I suppose, is the key to all of what I've talked about to date, and the underpinning piece of the title of my presentation, I suppose. This is a great article, Humanising the Machinery of Care. If you haven't heard it or seen it, I would definitely get it, and I definitely can share it with you. It's an article by Charlie Jones and Martin Seeger, both clinical psychologists, and actually Martin's an adult psychotherapist as well. And it talks about when we have connection with ourselves, we have a greater, deeper, more authentic connection with everyone else. And when you look again at the definition of humanize, it's to make someone or something kinder, gentler, or more agreeable. That can go for kinder, gentler, more agreeable for yourself, but similarly, it can be kinder, gentler, more agreeable for everyone who we serve, really. But I suppose why I put this article in, and this is where the challenge comes to me, even in my daily practice, and perhaps to you, is that it also talks about kindness being delicate, and that once you actually operationalize kindness, you can actually lose some of the essence, some of the spontaneity, some of the human interaction, really. And I suppose that was why I brought up some of the things that we definitely do and we talk about in our HR world. So we talk a lot about joy at work, and about engagement activities, about reward and recognition activities. And I suppose I sometimes have to step back and ask my question is that genuinely being kind and compassionate, or is that operationalizing what we think we need to do? Again, the article goes on to talk about a cancer patient who a nurse actually at the end of their shift creates and goes away after their shift, makes the patient a hot chocolate and sends it to him. And he said that the nurse had gone out of her way to do it. So she had done something kind, something human. But what did the organisation do then? The organisation did a hot chocolate round. They operationalised the hot chocolate round, and then it no longer became a human interaction. It just become a thing to do. And I suppose that's what I want us to think about in HR. We need to consider about, do we operationalize and process things, or do we allow things to be just our natural human behaviours, really? And I'm not saying we don't do those things. I just think we need to question ourselves in terms of, but do we have the balance right? Do we have the operationalising something balanced with actually how do we create the conditions where it just becomes a natural human interaction with each other? So there is a beware with that. Again, I talked about in our model, compassionate leadership is also about your emotional intelligence. And I suppose this is just, again, a model for us to think about, because it is really important that you know your own state of mind and be compassionate with yourself about where you are right this very moment, because that will impact on how you're feeling, how you're thinking, and ultimately how you behave, really. So as individuals, HR professionals, we need to daylight. So the feelings wheel that I shared with you earlier, I have that on a board in front of me. I look at it every morning when I go in. I sometimes look at it during the day, because I do need to recognise that my mood, my impact, and how that will impact on others around me, really. I suppose the other thing is that we need to create, one of the key things that I said in my talk today would be about how do we create the conditions, really, of humanising care or compassionate leadership. And again, I suppose that we have to see that every interaction that we have in our organisations, in our life, really, I suppose, is an opportunity to shape culture. And that's no different for us as an HR professional as it is for a parent, a mother, a partner, a friend, etc., etc. But in our HR world, we have to realise that every interaction, every one of us, every day in our work has an opportunity to shape compassionate and a collective culture. And I suppose that's the question I also have to I mean, again, I'm now being very open with you. I had a question earlier with one of my colleagues where we were talking about how some other colleagues were making us feel and the impact of what that might do and the behaviours I might have. And I literally had to stop myself in my tracks and say, but is that the right thing to do? Is that aligned with my values of being compassionate, human, etc., etc.? And we also know, back to that Compassionomics book and the research, we also know that the environment that we're in at the minute, this very fast-paced, pressurised, emotionally charged environment of the pandemic can create us to operate outside our normal behaviours. Stress makes us and creates the conditions where we sometimes don't work at our optimal. We don't work of how we typically feel or should or know we should be behaving, really. But there is something about us checking and challenging every day. And again, once again, reminding ourselves that every interaction that we have as an HR professional out in the system, whether it's in the corridor, whether it's in a workshop, whether it's in a meeting, every day, every one of us has an opportunity to shape a compassionate culture. And I suppose, again, my challenge back to you is, how often do you do that? How often do you consider that in your day-to-day work? So I suppose, again, one of the things about creating a compassionate culture, we need to realise that we as leaders, and again, I genuinely believe that everyone has a leadership responsibility in our organisations, because what we pay attention to, what we focus on, what we talk about, how we behave, how we act, that's really what tells people what we're all about. And again, I've just put this up because I think, again, that when people talk about compassion, they think it's soft, it's fluffy, it's you know, candles and nice scenty things, etc. around the place. But actually, what I would say is compassion is probably one of the most difficult things, one of the most courageous things that you can do. It's actually quite difficult, I think, in an environment where command and control sometimes is seen to get results. But actually, we again know that if we were actually to be compassionate and have compassionate cultures, that we would get greater results, greater empathy, greater action, greater productivity, reduced stress, less mortality, etc., etc. But we also know that compassion is probably one of the most difficult things we do, because people have a mindset about what compassion means, really. Again, just a few quotes coming up here, folks, of things that I think are important to share. Nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And again, I think this is really important for us as HR professionals. I mean, our clues in our title, let's face it, human, and it is about us realizing that people need to see us acting in a compassionate way, in an authentic way, in a human way, I suppose, for me. But that in itself also, I talk a lot about in my day-to-day work, I talk about confident vulnerability, really. And confident vulnerability is, it's not easy for us to show a level of vulnerability. So for myself as a leader or a manager in my system, it's not easy to show a level of vulnerability. But it's definitely what is necessary to develop a compassionate culture. It's about saying, I'm not okay. It's about saying, I don't know. It's about saying, I'm feeling a bit burnt out today. I'm feeling a bit agitated, etc., etc. And it's about recognizing that that vulnerability is not weakness. It is actually courageous, because let's face it, being and showing a vulnerability, people can use that against you. So if we're being really honest, people can use a vulnerability against you. But again, the courage is to recognize that actually, you know what, to develop a culture of compassionate leadership, every one of us, every single interaction, we actually model that and model that compassion every single day. And that's how we'll create a culture of compassion. I suppose the key in all of that is just being authentic, being yourself, and being committed to yourself and others. And that's where, again, when I talk about compassion, I do talk about compassionate self-care and compassionate care for others. So it is about the commitment to yourself, looking after yourself. And again, I could have put a poll in around how compassionate are you with self, really? Do you look after yourself? Are you looking after yourself at this point in time? So who's looking after those who are looking after everyone else, really? So, and there are some days when it's okay. I seen Nikki there says it's okay not to be okay. And that's exactly it. But that shows a level of vulnerability. That shows a level of courage in our system. And that shows others that it's okay not to be okay. Because as leaders, we actually role model that every single day. Again, one of my favorite people and one of my favorite readings really is Brené Brown. And again, she talks about vulnerability sounding like truth, feels like courage, and actually truth and courage are always comfortable, but they're never weakness, really. So again, it's saying that it's okay to not be comfortable with some of this stuff. It's powerful, and I actually love the word courageous, because I actually do think compassionate leadership and compassionate systems are very courageous, because it's not what we're used to. It's not command and control. It's not what we see typically gains results. But for us as HR professionals, we know it's exactly the thing that we need to do. But I think we need to give our people and our systems enough courage to be able to say that it's okay to do this thing. It's okay to be compassionate. It's okay to humanize our care and how we deliver what we do, really. And I suppose this is one of my final sessions. And I suppose this again is very, it's all about self-compassion. And this is one of the most, the things that you can do most of all. And I suppose it's, again, a mantra to myself a lot. And again, I want you guys to think about it is, being self-compassionate is about being kind, being mindful to self. And I suppose in all of that, we need to recognize that we won't always make the right decisions, that actually we will mess it up. Sometimes we won't get it right. People won't be happy with us. Everything doesn't go to clockwork. It won't go to plan, etc., etc. But actually, you know what? Failure isn't the big thing. It's about, it is a success if we actually see it as a learning piece, really. So for me, again, showing a level of compassion, showing a level of vulnerability won't always work out for me. And people have used that against us. You will use it against you, but recognizing it is the right thing to do. But sometimes we mess up. Sometimes we don't get it right. And the confident vulnerability will be the HR professional who says, okay, guys, I know that wasn't right, but actually, what can we learn about this? What can we do differently next time? So I suppose, back to my challenge right earlier on as an HR profession, do we have the balance between process and humanizing our care? Do we have the balance between humanizing what we do and making it a human interaction versus the need to operationalize HR processes and practices? I suppose this to me is the challenge. This to me is the dilemma. But I suppose ultimately this is also our biggest opportunity in HR. So thank you, folks. I'm happy to take any questions or look at the chat. I could talk about this all day, but I know you've other places to go and see. Maybe I'll just bring up the previous slide and leave that up. But I'm happy to take any questions, thoughts, or observations, really. But thank you very much for your time. Oh, thank you, Rafa. The accent sometimes gets it and sometimes doesn't. So Nikki's asking, where would you start with this in an organization? And I suppose, Nikki, that's, I suppose, not easy for me, but what I would say is it is back to that whole thing. So what I was saying earlier, I suppose I'm really of the belief of you started anywhere and followed everywhere. Again, if we start to do it as a process, you start to remove the human element of it all. And I suppose my earlier comment around every interaction, every one of us every day has an opportunity to shape our compassion. I suppose that's the only bit that we can control. We can only control it in ourselves. I suppose another start might be to share something like this presentation with our staff and with everyone else, to try and get people to realize that actually the starting point is with you. It's the self-care, it's the self-compassion. But I think also one of the biggest parts of all of this, and I do genuinely talk about it quite a lot, is this element of confident vulnerability. I think showing a level of compassion in our system that can be, let's face it, quite command and control, quite process driven, can be very difficult, really. But it does require a level of courage to be confidently vulnerable. So for me, I suppose a long way to say that is, I think you start with self. I think that compassion has to start with self-compassion, but also to then start to make sure that you are humanizing things that we do rather than operationalizing things that we do. So hopefully that answers, Nikki, but if there's any other questions, happy to do that. And again, Rafaela, yeah, do you practice any holistic practice, Will, like meditation, mindfulness? Actually, this again is something I've recently started to do. And I suppose I'm currently, and again, I'm very early into this. So it's 1 hour a day split down into 3 20-minute slots. 20 minutes for mindfulness, 20 minutes for reading, and 20 minutes for exercise. So I know it sounds a lot, and again, it's taken me, again, it's trying to get that into a habit, really. I'm not always good at it, but therein lies the self-kindness and self-care. So where previously I would have probably beaten myself up quite a bit about not taking my 20 minutes for it, etc. I'm just trying to do it more this week than I did last week. But my ultimate aim is that each day I take 20 minutes for meditation or mindfulness, 20 minutes for exercise, and 20 minutes for exercise. I suppose I'm now on, this is probably about week 6, and last week and up to this week, I'm now getting into a process where I'm probably doing it every day, which is great. So yes, thank you very much for that. Someone asking about a recording, happy to do that. Nikki, start with self and don't be afraid to put your head above. And again, I think that's the courage part, really. Absolutely. Again, Kelly's saying about great session, important as leaders to understand their staff are humans, humanizing our approach to leading to form better relationships. And absolutely, I mean, Kelly, if again, I would read that article by Charlie and Martin. It was one of the key pivots for me during COVID to think about humanizing care. And again, I suppose I would have been just as much in breach of that of let's look at the process. How do we make sure we make people have joy at work? What's the process for engagement? What's the process for recognition and reward? And let's have an event about it. But actually, you know what? It's probably going against the whole human part of that. And you probably dehumanize it by making it a process. So I suppose, again, that's why I call this session Humanizing Our Care. I think we need to ensure, especially as HR, we need to get the balance between humanizing and the processes that need to support that. Again, Gold Mendel talks about because of authenticity has been so lost for so long, how do we practice our roles as HR? How do we reassure people in our organisation that compassionate gesture that we are now trying to achieve is genuine? And people are skeptical. And I think that's really, really, I mean, this is, again, really an important thing, because once you start to demonstrate that genuine authenticity, I suppose the genuine authenticity is people see it. It's back to this thing about every interaction, every one of us, every day. It can't be just a gesture now and again. If you slip out of being compassionate 1 day or 2 days and then try to do it again, I absolutely agree. Your authenticity is lost. You need to practice this every single day. And actually, if it is ingrained in your values, if genuine human behavior and compassion is ingrained within you and it's a value that you hold, it's something that you should be practicing every day. So I suppose that's, again, the development of our culture. Our culture isn't one, I would agree, of compassion. And I think there is a level of skepticism about when people are demonstrating compassion. But the only way we'll get over that, I believe, is if we continually do it over a long period, then it becomes part of our DNA, really. Again, there's some people sharing Deepak Chopra and Oprah launched free 21-day meditation. Absolutely. Some people, what are your views on egos? Yeah, well, that's a whole other conversation about egos. And again, I talk about the shadow side and the light side of egos. And there are, the shadow side of ego is where it is we are self-absorbed, we're doing what we're doing for other reasons rather than just a human behaviour. So again, it is maybe back to, you could say that some of the operationalising some of our natural HR behaviours are a way of egoising things, because it's about, oh, well, everyone must do this, everyone has to do it this way, etc., etc. I've thought up of this really good idea of how to do it, and therefore everyone should do it. So absolutely, ego does get in the way of everything. But again, it's whether you're using the dark side or the side of ego, or whether you're actually using that light side of ego. And light side of ego is, for me, all of the human element of that, really. So again, people saying that they're practicing Reiki, self-healing. And again, I can't stress that enough, first, folks. One of the first steps in compassionate leadership is the courage to have self-compassion. And I genuinely mean that. I think whilst HR professionals, we are constantly looking out for everyone else within our organisations, we do really need to start looking at ourselves and how, as I say, who's looking after the people who are looking after the people, really. So I think we really need to keep a mind of that. Again, many years ago, went from admin HR to occupational therapy, different and caring attitudes, and how me raising compassion can easily be lacking in HR when following processes. And I think, again, I think we do a fantastic job in HR. I suppose all of this is my presentation today is really just to try and get us to think about, are we operationalising too much? And should we draw back on that and actually just make some of what we do just a human interaction? Okay. So Kim, journalising, absolutely. I mean, I literally, again, and this is no word of a lie, I was discussing this morning about gratitude and journalising my gratitude at the end of the day. Again, I think it's just always about looking at how do you just continue to do it for yourself. And again, as I say, the person you need to start with in all of this is yourself. And one of my things is how to journalise the 3 things at the end of every day that I'm grateful for, really. So thanks very much for reminding us of that, Kim, as well. Because sometimes I think it is about just writing it down. Again, it's the visual thing sometimes. If you don't visualise it and you don't do it, sometimes it goes out of mind. And it's not that you intentionally forget about doing that stuff. It just is, you just forget about it because we're working in such a fast-paced, busy environment, really. And again, meditation and healing are going to be increasingly important to address in the mental health issues. Absolutely. I mean, again, we're talking about all of this. Our own HR agenda is talking about physical, mental health and well-being. And we're talking about it a lot for others. But what are we doing for ourselves in HR? What are we doing for ourselves as an HR practitioner? So we need to be, again, I can't stress it enough, you need to start with self-compassion, self-care first, and then do it for everyone else, really. I don't know how much we're on time, folks, or how much. I think we have another maybe 2 minutes. And again, Andrea, thank you. Great reminder. And I think that's all I suppose I wanted to do today, because we as HR guys know all of this stuff. I think it's just reminding ourselves and bringing it back to self, really. Thinking about our own practice, what we're doing every single day. And I would just ask everyone in HR to look after themselves and start with self-compassion, because then that will feed into your day-to-day behaviours and how you present yourselves around the rest of our organisations when we're looking after everyone else. So again, see, we need to head back, folks. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you for the lovely comments, folks. And again, you have my details, and if anyone wants to get in touch, it'd be lovely to hear from you all. So thank you very much. Thank you. Take care.